So the first opening plenary is really going to dive into better understanding the digital disparities, both in communities across the country, but also in the social impact sector. And we'll have Jason Mayer from the Indigenous Innovation Institute. We'll have Louise Adongo from Inspiring Communities, Aaron Knight at Open Media, and Charles Buchanan at Technology Helps. And so they'll kind of come together to paint a holistic picture of what digital disparity looks like in communities across the country, but also in the social purpose sector. Because some of us might know what that looks like, but I think we need to understand who's being left out, which regions, which populations, in what ways, and exactly what is digital equity today, right? Which may be something different 5 years ago, 10 years ago. So just getting a sort of a comprehensive picture is what plenary 1 will do. Then we'll dive into our second plenary, which is getting a bit more granular and getting a closer look at what do these digital transitions actually look like inside social purpose organizations on the ground. We have 4 really, really interesting perspectives. We'll have Sarana Sandy from Skills Change, who will tell us what this transition looks like through the lens of newcomer services, employment training, language training, coaching, etc. We'll have Lori Nickel from Second Harvest, which is a food rescue organization, and she'll talk about what this looks like from the food rescue perspective. Roger Simard, who is the Chief Digital Product Officer at Canadian Red Cross, will speak about this from a humanitarian aid perspective, which is something often that we miss out in our domestic conversations. While the Canadian Red Cross does work around the world, they also have been pretty active, particularly in the last 18 months or so, across the country as well, both with COVID-related response, but also wildfires and the opioid crisis and other things. So we'll hear from Roger, and then we'll also hear from Jade Stika, who is with Next Gen Men and does some really interesting work around mental health, working with youth, focused on preventing gender-based violence, and so really neat mission. And I think there's a lot that they have learned around transitioning their services. So they're really going to open up about the challenges, the twists and turns, the tough choices. And more importantly, perhaps how they funded some of the things that they implemented. How do they pick the programs that would go into a hybrid situation or move fully online? They're going to talk about all of that. And then the last plenary is going to dive really into how do we fund digital transitions? How do we fund digital tools, digital capacity? This plenary really gets to the heart of what it takes for funders to realize that this is a critical area worth funding. And what we've learned is that a number of funders, while they may have sort of in the last 18 months, lifted restrictions on some of the grants, where they said, listen, this is meant for these things, but you could use it to purchase a software license or to train your team in a digital tool. These things weren't actually baked into the grant itself. They weren't baked in the grant application. They weren't baked into the relationships that they have with funders. So this is really looking at what do funders need to better understand? How can we convince funders that funding digital capacity and infrastructure is critical right now? And we'll have a handful of speakers diving into this topic. We'll have Maureen James from she leads community investment at the Canadian Internet Registration Authority, or CIRA as it's known. Jennifer Flanagan, who leads Actua, Kate Brenchley at Canada Learning Code, and Joanna Kerr from Makeway. So, I think they're going to come together and really give funders some rich insights on what to do, also what not to do, and more importantly, I think paint a little bit of an urgency picture for funders that the next 12 months are going to be critical for social purpose organizations to transition and to prioritize funding digital infrastructure and digital capacity. So And finally, we'll have 4 really, really insightful breakout sessions. So these are going to be smaller sessions that really deep dive and get into some of the tactics and practical changes that have happened inside organizations. It's going to look at how fundraising is changing with a whole bunch of really interesting examples. It's going to look at how programs and services are changing. It's also going to dive into, we know a lot about inclusion and accessibility in the physical world, but inclusion and accessibility in the online world is very new for a lot of organizations. So we'll dive into that. And then the 4th breakout session will focus on technology standards for nonprofits. There's a lot of skepticism around technology, and rightly so. There's a lot of skepticism around data and whose data are we collecting and for what purpose and where does it get stored. So I think there's a few folks who are really working on standards for all of this, and we'll hear from them. So folks will get to hear from organizations like Canada Helps, Tip Tap Pay. They do some really interesting sort of touchless giving, have some interesting touchless giving solutions. We'll hear from Fable, who is a leading organization that works on accessibility, online accessibility and inclusion, and lots of other organizations.